Welcome to this Windows and computer channel, and we take a look at the next operating system that was for the consumer market, Windows Me, or Windows ME, or Windows Millennium, depending on how you want to talk about it. Windows Millennium is a follow-up to the Windows 98, Windows 98 second edition, and follows and resembles the Windows 98 and family of Windows 9X family of Windows. It, in my case, the operating system came with a new computer. I had purchased an HP computer, desktop computer, that was a Pentium 3 600 megahertz. It had also my first CD writer 4X, which was amazing for the time. And it, of course, is the operating system that was released after the Windows 98 and 98 second edition. It was released actually to manufacturing, so to all computer hardware makers on June 19th, 2000, but was released as a official release for retail September 14th, 2000. It started with good reviews, and a lot of people were happy until they used it. And boy, did this system crash. It was really a problem. It didn't have stability. It would crash all the time. I remember installing this on my Pentium 3 machine and being amazed at the fact that if you installed it 5 times, if you managed to go through the install without it crashing, it would actually react differently at each installs and crash at different places at each installs. To a point where when you actually had an install that seemed to be fairly stable, you would just leave it alone and prefer not to reinstall for a while. And reinstalling Windows back then was something much more frequent than today. We often reinstall Windows for all sorts of reasons. But Windows Millennium, when you had a good install that didn't crash too much, you just left it alone. What was the minimum requirements for Windows Millennium? Windows Millennium minimum requirements, according to Microsoft. VGA or higher resolution monitor, of course, and graphics adapter. Pentium 150 megahertz processor or better, the first operating system to actually require something more than the old, 80, 386, 486 machines. You had to move on to the Pentium processor or better. 150 megahertz if possible. 32 megabyte RAM or better. I had 64 if I remember well, and it ran okay on 64. It would take up to 650 megabyte of hard disk space, so you needed to have some space. A CD-ROM drive, as this is the first Windows that did not have 3.5-inch disk installs. It came on CD-ROM. Microsoft had decided, well, I think CD-ROMs are more popular enough now that this is how it works. It was, of course, following in the same game as Windows 98 and 98 SE with heavy active desktop installment and Internet, was part of the system. Internet Explorer was actually what ran a large chunk of the desktop, and so that was the way it was back then. It would require you to have a 28.8 kilobits per second modem or faster for an internet connection, sound card, speakers, headphones, and of course a compatible pointing device or Microsoft mouse. That was the absolute minimum requirement, and that was not running very fast and very well on that minimum requirement. On my Pentium 3, it actually ran quite well. And it would run actually much better if you had a graphics video card with at least 4 megabytes of video RAM. So we're starting to talk about, graphics adapters that have their own RAM here. Now, Windows Millennium introduced a few interesting things. First of all, it had an included Internet Explorer 5.5. And of course, that was upgraded up to Internet Explorer 6. Had Windows Media Player 7, which would actually be available up to version 9 on this Windows Millennium. It included something that a lot of people loved and used over time. Windows Movie Maker was something very popular for people that wanted to just be able to, get system little videos and make these little, movies and personal videos that were kind of, you could, play and tweak, which was kind of nice. And a lot of people liked that. A lot of people were sad when that went away, basically. It, of course, had for the first time, a different control panel that looked different than what we had in the past. And that was actually, you could view all the panel options or view the control panel most commonly used settings. So it's the first one that had the customization of how you wanted to see the control panel. It also had an interesting support for mass storage device. So it's the first time that you could plug in a external hard drive, a flash drive, and it was recognized. No need for that driver disk that you needed before on Windows 98. Some printers also were recognized immediately. I remember back then I had a dot matrix printer, an Epson dot matrix still, that I would use for stuff. Remember that I just plugged it in and it was there. I had nothing to do. It actually recognized it on, of course, USB. And so it was kind of interesting here, all this stuff that they had in here. It booted faster than previous versions of Windows because it actually had features to improve the cold boot time. And they just bypassed a lot of the setup stuff that were dependent on DOS, even though it was still a DOS based operating system. It had imaging device that were also plug and play and easy to set up from start. Scanners, digital cameras, things that were starting to get quite popular back in that moment. It had, of course, FireWire support improvements, stuff like that, which was very, very nice. Some networking capabilities that were added in there for better home networking and sharing, also for dial-up internet. It included for the first time a system restore, which was something that was brand new and that was really amazing because it let you go back in time to, of course, if you had problems, what you would do is you go into the system tools and you had your system restore here that you could actually click and run, and the system restore would actually help you create a point or go back in time to a point. And boy, in Windows Millennium, that was useful because there were so many problems that you would go back in time all the time. It also has, for the first time, something called system file protection, so that the system files are protected from the possible derangement of what users could be doing, basically. It had automatic updates and the Windows Update, and it would actually check every 24 hours to see if a new update was available. Lots of interesting stuff that were here, but unfortunately, it crashed so much that it was dreadfully problematic. Now, this is not too, because some people might actually look at this and say, well, that's Windows 2000. No, Windows 2000 was a very different thing. And we're going to talk about Windows 2000 when I actually end this series, because Windows 2000 never was meant to be a user, general public Windows. It was meant for business. And Windows XP actually is something that was built using Windows 2000's technology. That's why we departed and had a very different operating system with Windows XP. This was Windows Millennium. Was made for consumers only, actually. There was, at that time, 2 different Windows. Something that today, we have Pro and we have, Enterprise, but they're mainly the same Windows, just that they had certain features for, depending on if you're just a user or an enterprise or, whatever. Back then, Microsoft actually had 2 separate systems. One was for business only, one was for consumer only. So it told you that consumers were kind of something important for Microsoft because they actually created their own operating systems for consumers. But all of that finally merged in Windows XP. And so that's kind of interesting here. And of course, it came with something that also a lot of people might remember, MSN Messenger. You guys remember that? MSN Messenger was the first, probably the first, there was ICQ and there was a few different, messaging apps back then, but I think MSN Messenger has its place in one of the most popular messaging apps that existed. Now, we're getting at the time with Windows Millennium and all of that to where Microsoft is getting more and more heat and going into problems with the U.S. government because of its controlling everything with Internet Explorer. Back then, Netscape still very popular, but he's losing ground fast because Microsoft is pushing Internet Explorer so hard that people just get on the internet and use what they have, and Internet Explorer is already there, so why download something else? Which is a different way of thinking from today, where today a lot of people use Edge to download something else. Back then, people would just use what's there, and what was there was Internet Explorer, and that put Microsoft into a lot of trouble. So lots of little things. And one last thing about Windows Millennium, it was different enough in its code that some Windows 98 software didn't run well also because of some of the changes in the in there. One of the pages I see here says that it was still possible to get 3.5-inch floppy drive for installed, but I've never seen a Windows Millennium on floppy. I can tell you that. So Windows Millennium was really a system that could have had some really nice new features that were great, but crashed too much, was unreliable, and was really a big problem. I give Windows Millennium a 4 out of 10 score, and mainly because of some of the new technologies that they included in there. If you enjoy my videos, please subscribe, give us thumbs up. Hope you enjoy this look at the operating systems for Windows.